Once an Oiler, always an Oiler. I think the first time I heard that, it was uttered by my guest today. He's a six-time Stanley Cup champion and a member of the Hockey Hall of Fame.
Reluctantly.
Today's podcast is brought to you by the Edmonton Oilers Community Foundation. The foundation has contributed to more than 2,900 charitable organizations and minor hockey programs across oil country. You can find out more about the Edmonton Oilers Community Foundation at nhl.com/oilers/EOCF.
Reluctantly.
Kevin Lowe, As I Live and Breathe. There you are.
Terry Evans, the same. I mean, I didn't know what you looked like for years. Just heard you on the radio.
Well, it's funny. This comes about because I happened to stumble upon something that it was a photo op or a quick video that was posted on LinkedIn. And I saw that you were traipsing around the province of Alberta, oil country, as it were, being an ambassador for the Edmonton Oilers, as per usual. That still takes up a tremendous amount of your time, doesn't it?
It does, and I enjoy it, Terry. I came to Edmonton in 1979, and other than living in New York City for 4 years playing for the Rangers, I lived here my whole life. And of course, all that time spent with the Oilers organization. So it's what I did for, 40 plus years. So it's hard to teach an old dog new tricks. And I'm fortunate the Oilers have permitted me to maintain that relationship with them as an ambassador, as an alumni, and I've always enjoyed it. I enjoy meeting people. It's, I think, what I do best, and if I can help spread a little of the hockey gospel, then I consider myself pretty fortunate.
And the way you've entrenched yourself into the community as well. I mean, you and I have worked together with the Christmas Bureau of Edmonton for a number of years, off and on, crossing paths. And you're an amazing ambassador for that one charity, but many others throughout oil country, and you can continue to do that. So it's not just being an ambassador for the Edmonton Oilers themselves, but it's also spending a tremendous amount of time in the community, shaking hands and kissing babies and raising money for desperately needed causes, right?
Yes, for sure. I mean, that really started, I think, by family nature. My dad and his brothers in the small town we lived in Quebec were very active in the community, supported minor sports. And it's sort of, I mean, I think the saying goes, as long as people ask, I'll keep, giving. It's a chance to give a little bit back for sure. But more importantly, you meet wonderful people who have great organizations trying to do all the right things. You mentioned the Christmas Bureau. Yeah, I've had a 40-year relationship with the Christmas Bureau. It's one of my favorite. Just more recently, Ronald McDonald and I have agreed to be the honorary co-chairs for Ronald McDonald House capital campaign to rebuild or to add more capacity for the Ronald McDonald Houses in Alberta. There's of course Edmonton here, and there's Red Deer, there's Medicine Hat, there's Calgary. That's such a needed thing for all the families that have to travel from afar. Big costs for care for the children and stuff. So it's a great cause. I'm also on the board of Swim Drink Fish Canada, which is I'm really proud of. It's a organization that helps protect our water. We're fortunate to have a lot of it in this country, but it's finite, and we gotta keep an eye on that. And the Edmonton Police Foundation, I really enjoy that as well. That's again locally, and the rest of the time, doing things like the Oilers have a wonderful program called Celebrating Oil Country, where we go into communities in and around in oil country that are good communities, are big Oiler fans. We're in Drayton Valley last week. It was wonderful. It was White Court and Vermilion over the years. It's a blessing, really, that I've been asked to do it. I enjoy doing it, and it's a lot of fun.
It's remarkable, too, when you talk about oil country and going to the surrounding satellite communities. It's amazing how many people are season ticket holders, but they live 2.5, 3, 4, 5 hours out of town, and they come in for every home game.
It's never, it never gets old for me when I think about that. I think the event you're referring to, I was actually in Saskatoon last week as well, raising money for the University of Saskatchewan Huskies hockey program. The alumni have a really good program there, and and I knew this before, met Oilers season ticket holders that drive from Saskatoon for a game and then turn around and drive back, if you can believe it. And I guess I've known that for years and years. Yeah, we're fortunate. I think the stat is still correct that the Oilers have the most percentage of privately held season ticket holders in the NHL. You know, Toronto's corporate, Montreal's corporate, Vancouver's corporate, even Calgary's pretty corporate, but Edmonton has that uniqueness about it. So, love fans from everywhere, you know, Northern Alberta, BC. It's really cool to see.
Let's talk about the collaboration or partnership. I'm not sure how you exactly would characterize it, but the deal that you've got going with Ronald McDonald House with Lanny McDonald, of all people. You've spent some time on the ice wearing different outfits than Lanny McDonald, and it hasn't always been pleasant. How does that whole thing translate from back in the playing days to being brothers in arms for a charitable cause this time around? As you obviously you're not young men anymore. You're just young men with a great cause in mind. How does that work out with you and Lanny?
Yeah, you can say old men, Terry. It's okay. I'm okay with it. I'm 65.
Well, you did turn 65 this year, so
yeah,
I guess you're getting some deals at restaurants and Shoppers Drug Mart, right?
Yeah, Shoppers Drug Mart for sure. Well, you would know this well, and I think I know where you're going. You're talking about the Battle of Alberta. It was it's legitimate. It was one of the great rivalries in all of sports, professional sports. I mean, you're good friends with Charlie Huddy, and so Charlie told you a lot of war stories. We have, we've all grown up and we have buried the hatchets, I think. But there was a time, literally, that, nowadays you see players, they socialize in the summer together on opposition teams. And even after games, they're kind of high-fiving one another, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, those days, we wouldn't even, we wanted to kill each other. Like literally, I'm not joking when I say, if it hadn't been, say it was the off season somewhere and I saw a Calgary Flame walking down the sidewalk, I would cross over to the other side of the street because I wouldn't even want to make eye contact with them. And they felt the same way. I know this for a fact about us. So just a different era. But I mean, Lanny is such an amazing guy, an amazing ambassador. It was actually Lanny that phoned me. He had already been the honorary chair down in the Calgary area, and now Edmonton is going to be doing the same thing, and you'll see in the news in the coming months where we're going to try to raise money to expand the house, and lots of excitement around that. But special to work with Lanny. He was the guy that phoned me a couple of years back when I was cutting the lawn here in Edmonton in the middle of the summer, and he phoned to say that I was one of the newest inductees to the Hockey Hall of Fame, because of course Lanny was the chairman of the Hockey Hall of Fame at the time. So, yeah, it's good to reconnect with those guys. I mean, Lanny was a skilled guy. He wasn't one of those tough guys. So it's not like we were ever combative as opponents. But he played right wing. I was a left defenseman, so I tried to hit him lots, and often successful, and oftentimes I missed him and hurt my left hip, which I had to have replaced since then, actually.
Your left hip and your pride from time to time.
Yeah.
Mind you, I've seen a few times where Lanny McDonald was able to handle himself pretty well.
Oh, yeah, he was tough. No, I wouldn't have thought of going there. He could scrap, but he didn't fight a ton, but he could. Tough Western guy for sure.
And you talk about letting, things slide after years of mortal combat on the ice. I don't know if I could still be that way about Neil Sheehy.
Yeah. Well,
Never.
I have to be honest. I haven't seen him, right? Oh, so, yeah. He was such a blister in the.
Oh my God.
And I know Oiler fans hated Neil Sheehy, but he did a good job. He was a pretty skilled guy too, and decently tough. But he was just the ultimate pest. He just hounded Gretz at every turn. He did a good job.
You talk about Lanny McDonald making the phone call to you, letting you know about the Hockey Hall of Fame. That was, I guess, and you're eligible for a number of years before you got into the Hockey Hall of Fame. And when you think about it, because right at the beginning of our conversation, you talked about being back home in Quebec when you were a kid. Then all of a sudden, there's a reference to Lanny McDonald telling you that you're in the Hockey Hall of Fame. there's a lot of time in between those two places in history that took place. So I was, just to talk about some of the things that transpired over the course of your career. And one of the things I wanted to ask you, I thought I was in the airport, not this past weekend, the weekend before, and I saw a book called Draft Day. And I thought, I want, it's changed so much over the years. And then I saw you on LinkedIn, and I thought, hey, I should talk to Kevin on the podcast. And then, of course, I put two and two together, you being the first NHL draft pick for the Edmonton Oilers, which is significant in history, back in 1979, 21st overall. And then, just the book Draft Day made me think to ask you some questions about Draft Day, because you've been there on Draft Day where you got drafted, and that you've also been in the position where you were drafting people as a general manager and as part of the coaching staff. So Draft Day for you, what was it like? Did they have a big do back in 1979? Was it all in an arena? Was it televised? Was it this big production like they have now?
Well, not anything like it is today for sure. The production you're talking about, but it was the draft was always in Montreal back in that time. But in my year, that's the year the Oilers joined the NHL, along with the Quebec Nordiques, the Hartford Whalers, and the Winnipeg Jets.
Uh-huh.
So the draft was actually delayed. It normally happens in June every year, and the draft got postponed. And, a completely different era of media relative to hockey. I mean, when my agent phoned me, there was nothing in the news about it, really, that the draft was being postponed. I mean, and the only people who would know about the draft would be obviously hockey people, players, agents, managers, et cetera, et cetera. And the reason why it was postponed, because they hadn't finalized the deal to bring those four WHA teams, Edmonton, Quebec, Hartford, and Winnipeg, in with the NHL. So they had to dot the I's and cross the T's, I guess, on all the legalities and the agreements, et cetera, et cetera. So it was fine. It was postponed. Alan Eagleson was my agent, and I said, well, when's the draft going to be? He says, well, we don't know, but it could be as late as August, kind of thing. So there was a lot of unknown going on. Of course, that was it for me. And then when they finally had it, it was done by telephone. There wasn't as much pomp and circumstance, of course, back then as it was today, but there was still significant to go to the draft and be picked and meet the manager and coach who was ever going to be there, the scouts that actually draft you. So I missed all that. And so my experience was Eagleson phoned me up. The draft's I can't remember the time frame, but I was in the East, living in Lachute, Quebec, and with my mom. I think the draft was going to start at 9 a.m. or something, a.m. And so Eagleson said, I'll call you as soon as I find out. And I said, well, how long do you think that'll be, right? Because I was projected to be a first-round pick. And he said, well, it'll be within an hour for sure, because I think you're going in the top 10, worst case scenario. So 2 hours ran by, and it was like, okay, this is a bad sign. So I left the house and I went to my cousin's place, and they both were older than me, and they had one was playing, had just finished playing major junior hockey, was going to become a pro, and the other one had played at St. FX University. So some kind of experienced hockey guys, and I could see that they were thinking, this kid might not get drafted, like who really knows? So they were trying to, I wasn't really freaking out, but they knew when I showed up their door that they poured me a glass of whiskey, and we sat around, talked, and they were like, you're going to get drafted. Don't worry about it. It's going to be fine. And anyways, my mother finally phoned me, said, get home. Alan Eagleson's going to phone you. So I didn't know anything. I didn't know what was going on. Turns out I ended up being drafted later, the last pick of the first round. As you said, the first pick of the Oilers. So it was 21st overall back then. And Eagleson said, well, you got your wish. You're a first round pick. And I said, okay, well, that's good. Where'd I go? He says, Edmonton. I go, Edmonton? They're not even in the NHL. Like, I didn't even know Edmonton was going to be in the NHL. And he says, oh yeah, they're just joining the NHL and stuff. It was all kind of, it was like, okay, that's great. I'm first round pick, and then fast forward to, I'll finish on this story so you can ask another question. But like to think when I finally arrived in Edmonton, I'd never been further west than London, Ontario, go to camp, get on the ice, start, when you're a first round pick, the veterans, make sure they introduce themselves and stuff. So I had met Wayne, amongst the guys, but that was kind of it. And then I don't know, like a short time after in training camp, he skates up beside me and in a warm up, and he says, "Hey, I was thinking like maybe you and I should get a place together." I said, "Oh, that'd be great, but I don't even know if I'm going to make the team. Like I could be down in Houston in the farm team, right?" And Wayne was like, "Don't worry about it. You're going to make the team." I was just turned 20. He was, 18 and a half. And, the maturity and the understanding of the pro game already. Of course, he had played the year before for the Oilers in the World Hockey Association. But like when you say, there's a lot of stuff that has happened. Yeah, there's been a lot of stuff has happened, but nothing better than getting drafted by Edmonton, actually, the way things turned out.
Everybody talks about the core. Like to this day, there's the core. It doesn't matter what sport you're talking about, whether it's basketball, the Toronto Raptors, they always talk about the core. Somebody from the core got traded away. And then, the current Oilers core with McDavid and Draisaitl, Darnell Nurse, and a couple of other guys that may or may not be considered by as the core, depending on who you ask, I suppose. But with the Oilers in 1979, 1980, 1981, that core was, how many was there? Eight?
Yeah.
9 of you in the core?
Well, yeah. Barry Fraser was the Oilers' longtime scout. And of course, when the Oilers, basically built their team in the first 5 years and a lot of that, which is the core, and a guy who perhaps sometimes doesn't get mentioned as a core, but he should be, is Charlie Huddy. And I think that's just because Charlie wasn't drafted by the Oilers. He was an undrafted free agent in our draft year, so the very first year, and ended up becoming a 5-time Stanley Cup champion and like pivotal to the Oilers' success. But if you think in that time frame, so in that very first year, the Oilers drafted Glenn Anderson, Mark Messier, and myself, and Charlie was a free agent. The next year, they drafted Paul Coffey, Yari Curry, Andy Moe. And then the next year, they drafted Grant Fuhr, Steve Smith, Esa Tikkanen. You know what I mean? So that's a bit of the metamorphosis of a dynasty, right? But the interesting thing about Barry Fraser, again, recognized as like a scouting guru, when you really dissect it, you could say he made a lot of mistakes because he drafted me ahead of Messier and Anderson. Like Messier should have been first and then Anderson and then me, but that's the way it works out sometimes.
It's an incredible legacy that was laid down, and to have a core like that, legendary, and then a core like we're witnessing now, also legendary. And that was the other thing too, is we've recently seen Connor McDavid score his 1,000th point in his 10th year in the league. And I thought, wow, this will be fun to look up Kevin's stats and see how he did. But you know what? It's pretty impressive if you think about it. You got 1,250 some odd games in the league and over 430 points. So you're better than a point every 3 games for a stay-at-home defenseman. You certainly wouldn't consider yourself. Nobody really considered you an offensive defenseman. You were the guy who was the last. You saved the day more than not. Almost 350 goals almost 350 assists and almost 100 goals. Pretty admirable.
Well, I love that self-deprecating humor. It was a high offensive era, and I probably could get 10 assists by just throwing it off the glass and getting out of the zone and someone would skate into it. But tooting my own horn, no, for sure, I was an offensive defenseman in junior. I led the team in scoring, but that quickly changed when Paul Coffey arrived. There was a guy that was, like 10 times better than me in that category. So I had to reinvent myself, and we scored enough. So, enough to win, obviously. We just needed to keep him out of the net, and it became, along with Lee Foglin, we sort of became the shutdown pair and relished the opportunity because you get to play a lot of critical minutes, and you can be a big part of the success of the team by doing that. So, and a lot of nights when you're up 6-1, well, you're not really thinking about padding your stats, right? We're just winning cups. I didn't care. I mean, I probably could have done, 50% more of that if I really, well, if it was necessary or I really wanted to. Not, you know what I mean? That kind of sounds like cocky, but like you don't think about going to get a point. I mean, Cop would because that's what he did, right? And he was good at it. If we were winning 7-1. The guy scored 49 goals in a season once, like as a defenseman, if you can believe it. But yeah, different era. And thanks for bringing that up. I'll when we get off the podcast, when I was in Saskatoon at the event, they got someone from TSN to do the TSN top 10 for me, and they're like eight of them were goals, but they were all tap-ins around the net. So I did get up there. I like to jump in the play. Like I was always, our guys, if Gretz had the puck or Mess had the puck or any of those guys, you were pretty safe to get up and get. I'd always follow the rush and then kind of jump in a hole, and then obviously sometimes Gretz would look at me and go, "I'm not giving it to him." So then I go back to the point and wait for it. But that was the style that Glenn Sather wanted us to play. We are all part of the offense as much as we all eventually became part of the defense.
The Edmonton Oilers Community Foundation is a proud supporter of oil country and has been contributing to our community's success since 2001, with a focus on programs aimed at those most vulnerable in our community and youth hockey programming as well. You can find out more about the Edmonton Oilers Community Foundation by going to nhl.com/Oilers/EOCF.
Reluctantly.
With so many high-powered offensive stars on the Edmonton Oilers Hockey Club in the early to mid-'80s, there was probably more opportunities than not for Curry, Anderson, Coffey, Gretzky, Messier, all those guys to get the interviews in between periods or in front of the games. And we didn't have the visual part of the game that we see every Oilers game on television now. But back then, you were lucky if you saw one a month because of the way Hockey Night in Canada and all that stuff. It was just limited access to it, really. But do you remember, and tell me about the first time you got interviewed on Hockey Night in Canada, and do you remember the circumstances behind it?
I can't remember the first time, to be honest, on Hockey Night in Canada. Of course, our games were done by ITV back then. So, I probably was on an ITV interview before I would have been on a Saturday night Hockey Night in Canada interview. But that was, for me, I grew up in the Montreal area. So we'd go to the Montreal Forum, and right across from our dressing room was, the Hockey Night in Canada people like Dick Irvin and Danny Gallivan and all these guys. It was like that. For me, that was like, those are godlike people, right?
Mm-hmm.
Besides even thinking about playing against Lafleur and Robinson and those guys, it was special. But where I was a little bit fortunate, I guess, if being interviewed is important to people, is because I'm fairly bilingual, and at the time I was the only guy in the Oilers that could speak French. So all those years we went in deep in the playoffs. CBC's version of Quebec television is Radio Canada, right?
Right.
And so I was the only guy that could go on in between periods and do interviews. So I was on TV in French all the time, including our first few cup years, where literally they pulled me as soon as I got off the ice. I didn't even go to the dressing room. I would be in studio with them for about a half an hour, and a couple times couldn't even get back in the dressing room. There's so many people in the dressing room. So yeah, I thought I think, they used to give out they didn't originally, but in more recent years, when the guys go on Hockey Night in Canada, they'll have a towel with the little Hockey Night in Canada crest, and so they hand those out, which is pretty cool.
I was actually going to ask you that, if you still have the Hockey Night in Canada towel.
I think I do, yeah, at our summer place on the Shuswap Lake in BC. I've got a lot of that stuff packed away somewhere.
It was going to be something I was going to ask later, but since you brought it up, you're young in the league, you're starting to see success. You're, after growing up in the Montreal or, French speaking and playing against the Canadians, Larry Robinson, Guy Lafleur, as you're coming into the league, you're starting to play against these guys who are either in their prime or maybe on the back end of their prime. Who was the guy that you played against as he was tailing off, as you were coming in? Everything was happening for the Oilers. Maybe everything was sliding for another team. Who was the guy that you would just go, oh my God, I'm on the ice with that guy?
Well, relative to Montreal, I mean, it'd be all of them, but Lafleur probably, right? Because he was a right winger as a left defenseman, and you'd see him winding up and stuff, and going, I just start backing up right away and back right into the goalie so he wouldn't go around me. But probably the guy. Well, the two guys were Gordie Howe and Bobby Hull, because they both played that year for the Hartford Whalers. And Gordie was probably, Belleville was for sure, but Gordie was one of my idols. I happened to get an autograph from him when I was like 5 or 6 years old, and the Red Wings were always competitive, and Gordie was one of the NHL's best players. So that would probably be the aha moment for me. And then the next one would be lots of water under the bridge, but we won our cup in our 5th year, so finally lifting the Stanley Cup would be that next moment for me.
Oh, and that first year, winning the Stanley Cup, the team that you played against, the '84 Islanders, that was a formidable opponent. Of course, they had just come off the 4 in a row, and the story is legendary. How everybody from the Oilers walked past their dressing room and saw them, how that they were, anguishing in their injuries and all of the stuff, and everybody on the Oilers team at that time learned what it takes to win. But when you think about that team that you beat, there's Trottier, Bossy, Gillies, Potvin, Nystrom, Billy Smith. I mean, those players themselves, you're 5 years into the league, and those players are the people that you watched on Hockey Night in Canada as you were growing up playing minor hockey and then junior and that sort of thing. And all of a sudden, you win the Stanley Cup against them. I can't imagine that feeling.
Yeah. They took over from the Canadians, right? And they won their first cup in 1980. And actually, that was our first year in the NHL. And my brother Kenny, who was the longtime medical trainer for the Eskimos and the Oilers, he was getting married that day. The Islanders won their first game, and we were actually a little late for the wedding because it was an afternoon game, and we were watching the Islanders and the Flyers went into overtime, and Bobby Nystrom scored the winning goal for the first ever cup for the Islanders. And then they went on to win 19 straight series. And yeah, we finally did beat them. They were an albatross, man. They were a juggernaut, and they used to just whip our butt for fun, especially on Long Island. And they did that again in '83 when they swept us 4 straight. We learned a lot. We matured a lot. It's a combination of we were kind of ready, but they just ran out of gas, man. They were beat up. You can't go to 4 straight years of the Stanley Cup Finals, and probably a couple previous years prior to that where they were deep into the playoffs. It's just the wear and tear on the Stanley Cup playoffs is really difficult. But the only reason why we finally did beat them, besides that they're probably a little beat up, was and I tell people this often, is the biggest misconception about the 80s Oilers was that we won just because we had all that talent. Yeah, we had some of the game's greatest players and, an offensive juggernaut, but we only finally won because we buckled down and played serious, disciplined hockey. And we became like a really disciplined team, which, a lot of people don't even know, because that was the difference from '83 to '84, is that we had a system in place and we played it to a T. And then we learned that, okay, that's how it works. If we play as a team, we can win championships. And so we never lost that. That was the template. And we deviated a little in '86 when we lost to Calgary, but we pretty much stuck to that for a lot of years, winning cups.
In '84, you win against the Islanders, and you're playing against, Clark Gillies, probably one of the toughest guys in the league at that time. Mike Bossy, one of the most prolific scorers in NHL history, and then Billy Smith, who was just Billy Smith. But then from the Islanders, the next year, you go on and take on the Flyers, and then you're up against the Pool and Prop, the Sutter brothers, Tocchet, and we talked about Gordie, Gordie's son, Mark Howe and Kerr, and that there's another talented, tough team, and it's you get to the same point, and it's like, okay, what you got to muster it up to do it all over again. How do you figure? You talked about the Islanders just running out of gas, but the Flyers at that time, were they comparable to you with their personality as far as the longevity in the league? Like pretty early, pretty hungry. Oilers were 5-6 years into the league, you guys, and then they were also a younger team than what the Islanders were.
Yeah, they were. I wouldn't say they had nearly the firepower we did, but they were. They were a good, call it a formidable foe. Their team in '87 was better, of course, because they had Hextall on nets.
Yeah.
But the thing is, so you wonder, like, yes, people would wonder in more modern day, why did Tampa Bay win, cups like they did, or Chicago? First of all those players stayed around. Like, if you think for the Oilers' first 2 cups and the playoff year, the year before, so I'd say at least 3 years in a row, if not 4, the Oilers had the same 6 defensemen for all those years. We had the same pairs. They never changed the pairs. You think about the team now, guys get injured and et cetera, and they're moving guys in and out. So, and all pretty damn good. And then, you got Gretzky, Messier, Curry, and then you got Grant Fuhr nets. And I mean, it's a recipe for success. But as I pointed out, on top of that, we became a very disciplined team. So, I mean, that's a recipe for success, is when you got talent and structure and experience. I mean, I said this often, and it might sound cocky, but if we were disciplined and we played up to our capabilities, there was no one that could beat us. And the only times we did lose is when we got a little less structured and a little less disciplined. And that, teams are close. Like there's, but like I say, when you point out to all those factors, still young in age, experience, and maybe most importantly, what I'm missing is like super hungry to continue to win, because we knew what losing felt like, and we didn't like it. Winning is much more fun, and that becomes, you're almost addicted to winning, and you'll do everything you can to do that. So we knew there was a window, and it's like every year at the start of the year is okay. Last year's over. We're going to try to win a cup again.
In '85 against the Flyers, Prop and Poulin were on that team, and then in '90 against the Bruins, Prop and Poulin on that team. Is there a, hey, we beat you before, we're going to beat you again kind of mentality when you run into guys like that who end up getting traded, whether it's the deadline or free agency or whatever it was back at that time?
Yeah, I can't say, specifically, but that's it. I didn't, I guess I kind of knew that, but until you just pointed out, I really didn't know that. I just finished reading Mike Keenan's book, which is a pretty good book. And, he talks obviously a lot about the Oilers beating them in '85 and again in '87. And he got to the Stanley Cup Finals also with Chicago. Mm-hmm. So lose. I could imagine how he felt. And then until he finally won in New York with 7 ex-Oilers. That's a story for another day, I guess.
So here's another thing, too. If you look at it from the point of view where, we're beating you, we're winning the Stanley Cups. You did it 5 times as an Edmonton Oiler, once as a New York Ranger. But you're playing against Boston those 2 years, all right? So it's in '88 and then again in '90, you're playing against Boston, Cam Neely and Ray Bourque. Are you looking at Ray Bourque and saying, I'm super glad that I won the Stanley Cup, but at any point do you think, man, I sure hope at some point Ray can win a Stanley Cup? Like, is there just a smidge, just a tiny bit that kind of feels, I hope he wins one day, just not, no?
Zero. No, and Ray's a good friend of mine, actually, and just, obviously a Hall of Fame, amazing defenseman and stuff. Yeah, you don't really think I want to win. I don't want them to win. It's just we want to win, It's not, I never felt any sadness for the opposition not winning, because I don't know. Like I say, we experienced losing enough that it sucks. And remember Terry Jones, his famous headline after we lost to the Los Angeles Kings in 1982, nationwide, he called us weak-kneed wimps. that resonates, right? That's like, all right, we're going to show you, Jonesy. Like, you know what I mean? Like, the media, they always do their part in trying to firing up the story. So, yeah. And it's kind of like, if you do win, then you don't need to come up with any excuses. The season ends and it's like, nobody's asking you, well, what about this? What about that? What about, it's over. It's like going to work and doing a good job. You don't expect anyone to congratulate you or whatever. It's just what's expected of you. And then you have a good summer. Like, if we hated when we lost to the Flames in '86, I was telling the story the other day, Paul Coffey and I ended up, we got out of town here. Didn't want to answer like you go to the bars and they, people are generally pretty good, but you get the odd a-hole that's like, oh yeah, you guys aren't that good, and you want to get in a fight, which is not a good thing. So you just get out of town. And we're down in Phoenix at some bar, and the Flames are on, the game's on, Flames are playing whoever in the playoffs, and like the old days of the rear projection televisions, the big things they had in bars, and
Yeah.
Koff and I are playing pool, and he saunters over and behind the TV and pulls the plug, we couldn't even look at it. Like, we had no interest in watching the Flames play in the playoffs, zero. So that's, that's kind of the mindset I guess you're dealing with here.
So you win 5 in Edmonton, and then all of a sudden you're off to New York. You think about it, and we hear about hockey trades that happen all the time. We hear about people who are uprooted. And I guess the thing that really resonated for me was Knobloch coming to coach Edmonton. Last season, when Woodcroft got fired, they brought Knobloch in. And it's all of a sudden, okay, there's Chris Knobloch. I thought, hey, I know that guy. He played for the Edmonton Ice back in the WHL games when Chenoweth had them back in the city after so long. And, he was a great guy. And he was this. I had no idea. I thought, wow, I always thought he was just that 17-year-old kid playing for the Edmonton Ice. And all of a sudden, he's an NHL hockey coach. But the great thing about him coming was the emotion that he showed with the success that he was having, and the first time his family was able to come and watch him coach here in Edmonton. And it really kind of pinpointed and impacted me with the separation from family when a trade happens, and whether it's coaches or players. When you left Edmonton and went to New York, how impactful was that for you?
Well, it was hard to leave. I'd been here for 13 years, but everybody was, all like, I shouldn't say all my friends, because Craig McTavish was still playing and Kelly Buckberger, but it was partly, well, it was contractually motivated too, because Glenn Sather was doing what Glenn did best and trying to get you on a hometown discount. And it was time for me to really, I guess, in some respects, cash in. And I was an unrestricted free agent. If you can think about this now, guys become unrestricted, totally unrestricted after 7 years pro. So they can. So when Connor McDavid was 25 years old, he could shop his wares to anywhere he wanted. Of course, the Oilers signed him long before that. I had played 13 years in the league. I was unrestricted, but in that era, completely different time, the Oilers still had first right of refusal. So both Montreal and New York Rangers are trying to sign me, and they were offering me double what Glenn Sather was prepared to offer me. But they wouldn't put it in writing because the Oilers had the right to match. And in those days, when those types of things happen, inevitably, the team that was trying to acquire the player, in this case Montreal or Toronto or New York, would sign me to the contract, and then Sather would match it, and then he'd turn around and trade me to the Boston Bruins or the Toronto Maple Leafs, someone in their division, just to show the other opposition GM, you don't mess around those types of things. So I was at a stalemate. I didn't come to camp, and I just, kind of sat around until, Glenn finally decided that he was going to trade me. And I obviously had a good enough relationship with Glenn that when he finally did come to me, he said, okay, I've got 2 trades for you. You choose. You can go to Montreal or go to New York. And of course, Mess and Adam Graves and Jeff Bukaboom are already in New York. That was the team that was really stepping up for me. And I was a big Montreal Canadiens fan, like I said, but I passed on the Canadiens. Of course, the Canadiens won the Cup that year. So thinking I made a little bit of a mistake, but we went on to win the next Cup. But your question was, it was really an interesting time because Mess wanted to win a Cup in New York so bad, and I like winning cups. And it kind of, obviously it all came together, but it was tough. The Rangers hadn't won a cup in 54 years, and people were just thinking that it's like the Leafs now, right? They're 55 years. It's almost like they might not ever win again, or, it's going to be a long time just because stuff happens, right? Shit happens. And that was happening with the Rangers. So as Mess said, we got to slay the dragons here, man. There's some bad voodoo karma going on in this city with this team, and it's going to take all that Oiler voodoo for this to happen. And I'm glorifying it a little bit, but also all that experience, those cup rings, was a big difference. Like I wasn't a top player anymore at 35 years old on the Rangers, but had all the experience to say the right things and do the right things at the right time to, and of course Mess was there, but it's like we needed all that for the Rangers to win a cup. So how did it feel? It was amazing. Like 1 million people came to the parade. And I'll never forget seeing, it was a beautiful warm day. It's called the Parade of Heroes, right? It's where the astronauts and the presidents and the ticker tape and all that stuff. There was this picture stands out for me, is a little guy, ends up being his dad and his grandfather. And the little boy had a sign saying, "I thank you. My father thanks you, and my grandfather thanks you guys for winning the cup." That's kind of how long it had been. So that was pretty rewarding. And then, of course, to see Mess get all the accolades that he so rightfully deserved, arguably the greatest leader in professional sports ever, only NHL player to captain 2 Stanley Cup teams, guaranteed the win, all that stuff. I mean, he's been one of my best friends. We lived together. I have so much respect for that guy. And, he deserved anything and everything that's happened to him based on that victory.
The Edmonton Oilers Community Foundation is in pursuit of making our communities better, creating opportunities and access. The Oilers Community Foundation is focused on the following: growing the game of hockey for boys and girls in oil country at a grassroots level, and focusing on the needs of Edmonton's downtown community by engaging with organizations who are focused on delivering programs aimed at those most vulnerable in our community. You can find out more about the Edmonton Oilers Community Foundation by going to nhl.com/Oilers/EOCF.
Reluctantly.
And you went there in 92 for the 92 season. So were you married yet? Were you in?
Yeah.
Okay.
I got married in 90, yeah.
When you left Edmonton and went to New York, I don't know what your living situation was here in Edmonton, probably a nice house, maybe a little piece of land or something like that. But then you go to New York City. Were you in like an apartment? And how much of a culture shock was that?
Well, it was amazing. And yeah, if I go back in my early years, we would go into New York City and inevitably there'd be a garbage strike or something, garbage all over the place. And Times Square, 42nd Street was pretty scuzzy,
Uh-huh.
And I mean, Rudy Giuliani is a little bit of a lunatic, I think, but he was mayor at the time and he cleaned that city up and it became, and they realized that tourism was, a big part of their economy and stuff. So a lot had changed, but in the 80s, thinking who in their right mind would want to live in this city? Like it's, I grew up in a rural community, Edmonton back then was 500,000 people or something. So, we always had a lot of fun in New York City, though, I have to say. But then going there, yeah, I did. I lived in it's called Westchester, which is about 45 minutes to an hour from Manhattan, and that's where the Rangers practice facility was, and that's where most of the married guys lived. And Neil Smith, the general manager of the Rangers at the time, unbeknownst to me, things were going a little sideways with some relationships, and Mess was living in Manhattan, and Brian Leach and Mike Richter. And of course, when things don't go well with the hockey team, they think, well, maybe the guys are having too much fun living in the city and stuff. And so right away, Neil Smith said, "Hey, I hope you're going to live in the suburbs with the other married guys." So I was kind of pressured to live there, and Mess was disappointed. Like he was like, "What the hell are you living out there for, man? You're missing everything." So my last 2 years, I moved in. I had shoulder surgery in the off season, I stayed in Mess's in his 2-story brownstone on the Upper West Side. Karen and I and our 2 kids, ages 2 and like a couple months, we loved it. We just loved it. And so when we came back the next season, we got an apartment on the Upper West Side, right behind the Museum of Natural History. Just embraced everything about living in Manhattan. It was great.
When you talk about 1979 being drafted, and then the next 3, 4, 5 years as you guys grew up together on the ice in front of us, then in 94, 95, 96, 97, 98, you're there with Mess, you're there with Gravy, you're there, and then Gretz comes and plays in New York. Isn't it interesting how it was kind of bookended, how you grew up together and then you grew old together, and then you retired, Gretz retired, Mess retired, and everybody kind of went off. And so you grew up on the ice in front, and then you grew old on the ice. Isn't that something?
Yeah, it is. Yeah, and good relationships. I mean, Mac T talks about this a lot. He has always has such astute observations. He talked about this at his Hall of Fame induction, and he said the thing about the Oilers, again, another piece of the chemistry puzzle, was all good families, and Mess was a big driver in that, and Gretz, like, family was always involved, always around, all-star games, Stanley Cup playoffs. We were fortunate, and to that point, we're, good friends. We're in one another's wedding parties, and yeah, I mean, life moves on, right? I mean, he's lived in California, now lives in Florida, and, we talk maybe once every few months now, but, and Mark and I perhaps a little bit more, but whenever we get together, it's just like we saw each other yesterday, right? Nothing's really changed. We just get right back to where our relationships were, and it's pretty cool. And then to your point of growing old together. So Wayne was traded in 1988, and then, he retired in 99. I retired in 98. Mess was still playing for a few more years after. In his case, was having children, then eventually grandchildren. But it was in 2000, I had been, I'd just been a general manager for about a year, and I got a call from Wayne, and we didn't talk that often anymore. We'd see each other maybe at a game or something, I was just excited to hear from him, and he was phoning, I thought, just to say hi, but he was phoning because I wanted to ask me something. And that's when Bob Nicholson made Wayne the executive director of Team Canada for the Salt Lake City Olympics 18 months prior. And, one of Wayne's first calls, or at least that he said to me, was he phoned me to ask him to assist him. That is one of my best memories in hockey ever, cups aside, was just what you were talking about, the family, the growing up together. It was like, even though we really hadn't been connected for a dozen years, other than the bumping into each other once in a while, he felt highly enough about me to ask me to assist him in a pretty big job, right? Canada, the first time NHL players went to the Olympics was in 1998. And of course, they didn't win. They didn't play terrible, but, there were some people in our country who will remain nameless that thought, well, we need to have a whole inquiry into the problem with hockey in Canada. It was like craziness, right? They were all like, we lost in a shootout in a one-game affair against a goalie who was standing on his head. Fantastic. Like, it's not, you don't need an inquiry into that. But there was people, politicians, and senior hockey people, not so much in the NHL, but in the periphery, and I won't name the names, saying, well, no, we got to rethink what we do here in Canada. No, they just needed to hire the right people and get after it. And of course, Wayne was in there, and Lanny was helping out, Steve Tambellini, myself. Bob Nicholson was head of Hockey Canada, and the rest is history, right? Won the first gold medal in 50 years, but that was all part of growing up together, I guess.
To think about how everybody's moved on after their playing days, seeing Mess and Gretz doing their analysis for various television networks. Other Oilers, who mentioned off the top, once an Oiler, always an Oiler. Craig Simpson, who's entrenched himself into the Hockey Night in Canada situation with CBC and Sportsnet. Even Louis DeBrusque working with Sportsnet with Jack, doing all the Oilers games. And and some games with Henry Ryan. It's incredible. I'm especially just knocked out by Louis's ability to do what he does, considering what Louis went through with his playing career, and there was some off-ice stuff that was really difficult, and we're hearing more and more about players having to deal with that kind of thing these days, as mental health is a much more prominent sort of thing. So I'm always rooting for Louis. But one thing about Louis DeBrusk, and I wanted to ask you about it because it's something you experienced as well. Louis DeBrusk, when Jake came into play and he interviewed Jake down at ice level, and then they said, "I love you, Dad. I love you, son," on the television broadcast. Your son Keegan played pro hockey. How proud of a moment is that for you? I know you're proud of all of your kids equally, but as an NHL hockey player, a pro, and then seeing your son do the same thing, what is that?
Yeah, it's special. It doesn't get any better, really. Hard to put into words, but like back to Louis. Louis does a great job, and he's really become really good at what he does. And that was a special moment. I don't know Jake at all, but I hear he's a great kid, just like Louis, real solid people, good family people and stuff. And that was a special moment. But my little experience was my son Keegan played his first game in the NHL in Philadelphia against the Flyers. And that was for Carolina. He only played 4 games in the NHL, but he played 4 games in the NHL. He played over 600 games in the American League, and he's played professionally in Europe now, and has had a wonderful career, and super happy, and we're super proud of him. But the one game, Karen and I went to it. Keegan played. He plays a really good defensive game, and he sticks up for his teammates big time, and that's always been part of his DNA.
Well, we saw that a lot with the Oil Kings.
Absolutely. And he carried it on into the pros. And the one thing I said to him the day of the game, and this is actually all true, I'm not making it up, but so what did we do? Karen and I were there. He was a little bit nervous, but like any kid would be. And so we took him to the Rocky statue, right, and the steps, and Karen, he actually ran up the steps and stuff. And the one thing I said to him, I said, remember, don't take any shit from anybody. You're playing in the NHL right now, and the biggest mistake kids make is they have too much respect out there. So what is he doing? Like, he's fighting 7 minutes into the game, he's fighting with Vinny LeCavalier, like of all people, right? Who's playing for the Flyers. You can YouTube it and see Keegan Lowe, Vinny LeCavalier. That's I think 6 minutes into his first game, and I'm like, Karen is like, we're sitting in a suite, and she's like, oh my God, kind of like, well, she's seen him do it before, but she's looking at me, and I'm like looking for a response, and I said, well, LeCavalier went after him. Keegan, that was my response, but and I wasn't proud of him because he fought. I was proud of him that he ended up winning that fight, and then LeCavalier bit of a cheap shot at him and jumped him on the next fight. But anyways, I digress. But
Okay, Dad.
It was cool, and getting back to that moment with Louis and Jake, that was really cool. Yeah, it never gets old. I go over to watch him play in Europe. I saw him win the Swedish championship, and I was just like, I couldn't have been happier. It's like I won the championship. I was just so happy for him to experience. He'd won with the Oil Kings, won the West, but to win in pro hockey, regardless of what league it is, it's exciting for sure.
Connor McDavid, 1,000 points in his 10th season. The accomplishment being the 4th fastest. I was so hoping that he would do it before Bossy did, but he did it just after. And how special. I mean, we know, and maybe somebody's going to say, oh, what a stupid question to ask. But how special is Connor McDavid? You see him more often than most people.
No, he's worth the price of admission, like just plain and simple. Anywhere he goes, it's and there's very few players in the game you can say that about. I would say, I mean, Wayne was obviously filled the buildings, but a lot of times I would say if you weren't a knowledgeable hockey fan, you would kind of question, well, why is Gretzky so good? Other than he makes these incredible passes and stuff, and had a deceptively good shot. But there's no mistake in McDavid if you've never watched a hockey game before, you just look at the guy and you go, well, he's just faster than everyone else, and it's so noticeable. And the other guy I'd put in that category would be Bobby Orr. who was the same way, appeared to be head and shoulders above everybody else. Mario, for all his greatness, guys like Lafleur, and I'm trying to think now, the greats of the game that really stood out. I mean, some for different reasons, but not very many. Yeah, he's super happy. Surprised that Bossy did it so quickly. I knew Bossy was just a great player and a great goal scorer, but never had him in that category, but he scored 50 goals his first year, and of course that was the heyday of the Islanders. So they were putting up a lot of points. And
Well, then he did it like 4 years in a row or something like that. I saw him at a golf tournament. He was pretty adamant about bringing that up.
Yeah. Oh yeah. No. Yes. Mike was. God bless him. He's sadly passed away to cancer. But Mike was a different cat for sure. But I don't see any reason why Connor won't get 2,000. Because he's young enough. And someone pointed out on the telecast recently, like skating will probably slow down eventually, but he's still going to be as fast. That's what happens to players, right? They get older and they get slower, and that's why they don't produce. But he'll drop down to normal maybe by the time he's 35, right?
Yeah. One last thing I want to ask you about, and everybody's got an opinion on this. I was talking with Kevin Carius, a longtime sports guy in Edmonton. Ovechkin, he's coming closer and closer to breaking the all-time goals record, set, of course, by your pal, Wayne Gretzky. I asked Kevin Carius about it, and he says, "Oh, I don't want Ovechkin to brag." He goes, "For like 100 reasons." I said, "Okay, name 5," and he did. But one of the biggest ones was he wanted the greatest player to ever play the game to be the record holder, and that's Wayne Gretzky. What are your thoughts on Ovechkin coming close and possibly beating Wayne out for most goals in a career?
Yeah, I usually default to how Wayne's reacting. Of course, he's forever the ambassador, and I believe what he's saying. I mean, he's excited about it. It's good for the game, right? I didn't think Ovechkin would do it like a couple years ago, because I thought he was gonna time out of his age and stuff, and production draws down. And the other part I thought was, I've never even met Alex Ovechkin, so I don't even know what kind of guy he is, although I never hear bad things about him, which is always a good sign. But I've seen him a lot internationally. I've seen him playing for the Russians at the Olympics, where he's standing on that spot on the power play for 2 minutes and he doesn't move. And I can't think that players would love that, especially at that high level when you've got all these other great players. And the Capitals game was going downhill and they're not winning. And the whole idea of OV on the power play for 2 straight minutes probably doesn't go. I was worried about chemistry and stuff on the Capitals, and yet they're winning this year. They're doing well. So, and he's producing. He's obviously going to do it. I thought that he would for sure play long enough to do it, but I thought it might take him more time, and that would be sort of behind the scenes. Players would be saying, "Yeah, it's great, but not really happy about it."
Right.
So to answer your question, I think it's great for the game. It's think about all the talk that's happening, and like Wayne's got a gazillion records, and he really wasn't known as a goal scorer. He was known as a passer, right? Like, what is it?
Yeah.
Is it 5th or more than the second most points in the league or something, right? In the hits, just assists alone, not even his goals. So I'm sure he's thrilled about it. He remembered when he broke Gordy's record. Remember, Gordy came out here and nobody thought anyone would do that. So Wayne has always been the ultimate ambassador for the game, and this is just another example of it.
I can't thank you enough for spending an hour with me today. It's been a long acquaintance / friendship, and I appreciate it more than you know.
Hey, my pleasure, Terry. You're, Edmonton's a great city, as you know, a lot of great people, and I'm a pretty good judge of character. You and I didn't hang out much in our lifetime here, but as you say, we'd bump into the odd event and stuff. And you're always a gentleman, always doing all the right things for the community. So, and you look pretty young still. So, how old are you, anyways?
I will be 60 this year. So
you are young. You're 5 years younger than I am. But
yeah,
no, happy to do it. Really happy to do it.
Reluctantly.
Today's podcast brought to you by the Edmonton Oilers Community Foundation, with a focus on programs aimed at those most vulnerable in our community and youth hockey programming. To find out more about the Edmonton Oilers Community Foundation, go to nhl.com/Oilers/EOCF.
Reluctantly.